So you bought a cheap LS swap harness and you're trying to get it running in your throttle body injected Silverado. You're going to need a few wires to get everything up and running. Starting from this side of the engine bay, you got a purple wire inside of this harness going into your anti-lock brakes. This truck's a 1994. It was the purple wire was the one to go with. I tapped it with this red conductor here, and then we actually go over into a purple jumper that came on the harness. What this wire does is that it goes hot when you depress the brake pedal. The ECM needs to know when you hit the brake pedal so it can unlock the torque converter. So that only really applies to a manual transmission, or an automatic transmission truck. Moving over this way, in the factory throttle body injection harness, we've got a pink wire. It goes back over to your distributor and your OEM install. So what you're going to do with that is you're going to tap that and you're going to tie it into your key-on power wire in your swap harness, which I believe is this red wire over here. That's going to fire up this relay, that's going to fire up the computer, and that's going to let it know that it's priority time. It's going to cycle your fuel pump and stuff. On that note, you've got your factory fuel pump relay harness right here. I de-pinned the gray and the orange. Tapped those with a couple of wires and extended them, heat shrunk them so that they stay connected. Those go down into my custom-made Yeehaw loom system. They come down and they tap the relay. You got to put your own blade connectors in there though. So the harness comes with two relays. The one's the main power relay, and the other one is going to be your fuel pump relay, and it's got like a green and a black in it, but it's not going to have your hot and your switch leg in it. That's going to be these two wires. You got to add your own. If you just get regular old female spade terminals, you can jam them into this relay block, and that's how the fuel pump fires up on this truck in particular. That's great because you're not relying on your oil pressure sender to fire up your fuel pump anymore, because without the TBI computer in there, there's no run signal it gets from the distributor, so you're just riding on your oil pressure sender heating up your fuel pump, and that's kind of sketchy. I was having issues with it, so I activated that relay. There's all kinds of DIYs. If you look up LS swap harness fuel pump relay, it'll get a little more in depth with it, but this is just the nickel tour. So you've got torque converter lockup, you've got key on power. Where do you get your battery power? So we use the factory battery strap that goes all the way down to the starter. You can see it goes along the frame there, and you've got that rubberized clamp that goes down underneath the header and it lands on the starter. Your LS swap harness is going to have a loom that kind of goes down behind the back of the engine, down between the starter and the header, and it's going to land on the starter hot lead. Your crank position sensor wires in your LS swap harness are going to also be part of that leg of the harness. I ended up having an issue where my header collector fell off and it burned through those wires because they're pretty fragile. So what I did is I rerouted those. I extended them and I put them in a heat shield, and they go down underneath the front of the header so they don't cross paths with it. They just sneak behind it. So that's something that you may run into with your crank position sensor being buried underneath there behind the starter. You can imagine that was a pretty fun remedy to fix. But so you've got main power, you got key on power, you got torque converter lockup. You need to know your vehicle speed. Vehicle speed is this twisted pair of wires on 1994 Silverados and probably GMCs. You're going to have this purple-white tracer with a green-black tracer, it looks like. It's going to be a twisted pair. It'll be easy to find. I fished it out of my factory harness, and I ran it over to the vehicle speed pins on my engine control module. So if you look at this twisted red pair, that is that pair. That is that purple and that green that I just extended. I kept it twisted because it's probably for signal interference and whatnot. But that's just soldered into a couple of wires on the pinout. I had to look up for my 896 PCM what the pinout for was for your vehicle speed. So what's wonderful about that is that that's the factory wiring tied into the swap wiring. So not only does the output speed sensor on the transmission tell the ECM what my vehicle speed is, but now I'm getting signal to my speedometer inside the cab, so the speedometer still works. And it didn't require any calibration. It reads correctly. As far as tachometer signal goes, you're going to have another wire that goes into your distributor. I believe it's the white wire coming out of your distributor. It's tapped right here. So the white wire in the harness actually lands on the white wire that hits your old distributor connector. I just cut the connector off and I put some butt splices on there. So that'll get you tachometer signal. Now what I ended up having to do in HP tuners is I had to change the resolution that the tachometer reads in, because I was reading at half speed. The thing would be screaming at 4,000 RPM and it would show 2,000 on the tach. So I had to update my tachometer resolution. I think I had to double it, and now the tachometer reads pretty accurate when I got the laptop in the truck data logging. So that's more or less all the wires you need to get your LS swap up and running. If you want to get your gauges working, you got coolant temp for your LS swap. This is the coolant temp sensor in the front of the head where your old coolant temp sensor would have been. So I run this one because I believe that's the location that the coolant temp sensor goes on the LQ4. So that gives the ECM an accurate reading for coolant temperature, and that's tied into the swap harness. I retained my old coolant temp sensor, and what I did is these LS swaps are kind of slick because the heads are mirrored. So you've got a separate head bung on the other side. You can pull the Allen head plug out of there and get an adapter fitting so you can put your throttle body injection coolant temp sensor, the one for your gauge. I just left that tied into the factory harness. So now you've got speedometer, tachometer, and coolant temp. And it's just got two coolant temp sensors. One runs the gauge and one runs the computer. If you want oil pressure, you just get an adapter fitting. Kind of hard to see back there, but oil pressure sender down there is tied in. I can't remember if I used the adapter fitting or not, but you just tie that into the factory harness in the truck, because this ECM doesn't need to know what the oil pressure is at. So that'll get you your oil pressure, it'll get you your coolant temp, speedo, tach, and then the gas gauge is unchanged. I just put a higher pressure pump in the factory sender. All you need to do is get a pump for a 96 and up Silverado, one of the Vortec ones, and it just fit right into the throttle body injection hanger. And that's the long and short of getting your LS swap up and running in a 94 Silverado that was a factory throttle body injected truck, and getting the wires connected that you need to, and getting your factory gauges. Every gauge in the cluster works fantastically, except for the check engine light. I ignore that. Anyway, any other questions, leave me a comment.